The year was 1871, when the Wild West was still wild, before the railroads tamed the plains, before the cities swallowed the silence. Out beyond the edge of the Wyoming Territory, there lay a small, forgotten town named Silver Creek. It wasn't on any map worth reading, just a handful of wooden shacks, a church bell that never rang on time, and a saloon that smelled of smoke and whiskey. The people here were made of dust and dreams. Cowboys, drifters, miners, and traders, men and women trying to carve a life out of the endless prairie. And then there were the Lakota, the Native Americans who still lived by the river to the north. Proud, quiet people who watched from a distance as the white men's fences grew longer and their guns louder. Among them all lived a boy named Jack Turner, son of a poor ranch hand and a native mother from the Lakota tribe. He was neither fully white nor fully native, caught between two worlds, belonging to both and to neither. At just 8 years old, Jack already carried that look in his eyes, like he had seen too much sky and not enough kindness. He woke every morning before dawn, helping his father mend fences and feed the horses. The desert was cold at sunrise, wind slicing through the air, rattling the old barn doors. But Jack didn't mind. He liked the silence of those hours, when the world felt half asleep and full of secrets. That morning, as he carried a bucket of water from the well, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Hey, cowboy, you gonna work all day or talk to me for once?" He turned and saw Lila Monroe, the daughter of the richest man in Silver Creek. She was holding her dress in one hand to keep it from the dust, a wildflower tucked behind her ear. Her face was pale from the sun, but her eyes, they were brighter than the morning sky. Jack smirked, pretending not to care. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Lila. Your father'll tan your hide if he finds out." She grinned. "Then don't tell him." She took the bucket from his hands and set it down, ignoring the water that splashed her shoes. "You work too much," she said. "You should come ride with me. The hills look like gold today." Jack looked at her for a long moment. She didn't belong to this world, her skin too clean, her voice too soft. But somehow, when she was near, everything ugly around him faded. "Gold hills won't put food on our table," he said. She smiled sadly. "You always talk like an old man." Jack didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a stick and drew a line in the dirt between them. "Your world," he said, pointing to one side. "My world." She looked down, then stepped over the line. "Now, it's our world." Jack froze, then laughed. The first time he had laughed in days. Together they ran down to the river, chasing wild horses that galloped through the shallow water. Their laughter echoed across the canyon. Two children from different worlds, bound by something neither could name. Later that evening, when the sun dipped low and painted the land in fire, they sat under an old oak tree. Jack pulled out his small pocket knife and carved into the bark, "Jack plus Lila, forever." Lila smiled softly. "Forever's a long time, cowboy." Jack looked at her, his voice quiet but certain. "Then it's a good thing I'm not planning to die young." The wind blew warm through the grass, the same wind that had carried the songs of her people and the prayers of his mother. They didn't know it then, but that moment would become their beginning, and someday, their end. 6 years had passed since that summer under the old oak tree, yet the carving still stood clear. Jack plus Lila, forever. The bark had thickened, but the letters hadn't faded. Some promises, it seemed, grew stronger with time. Jack Turner was no longer the small boy who used to chase dragonflies by the river. He had grown taller, broader, his shoulders hardened by the sun and work. His father had died 2 winters ago in a ranch accident, leaving Jack and his mother alone. Now, he worked every waking hour for a local cattleman, branding, herding, riding, anything that kept food on their table and fire in the hearth. He didn't complain. Cowboys didn't. But sometimes, when the evening wind blew across the plains, he'd look toward the Monroe mansion on the hill, where the lights glowed warm and soft, and he'd think of her. Lila Monroe had grown into a young woman of quiet beauty. The whole town noticed her, the way she rode horses like she was born to, the way she smiled with both pride and pain in her eyes. But what most didn't know was that every week, just before sunset, she'd leave her house quietly and ride toward the river, to the tree. And every week Jack would already be there waiting. That's where they met again after all those years. The world had grown colder, but when they were together, it still felt like summer. The sound of the river mingled with the rustling grass as Lila climbed off her horse. "Still working yourself to death?" she asked, brushing her hair from her face. Jack grinned faintly. "Still sneaking out like a thief?" She laughed softly. "If Papa knew I came here, he'd lock me in the cellar." Jack's smile faded. "He still hates me, doesn't he?" Lila hesitated. "He doesn't hate you, Jack. He just thinks I'm not good enough," Jack finished for her, kicking at the dirt. He wasn't angry, not really. Just tired. Tired of how this world built fences not from wood, but from gold. Lila stepped closer. "You're wrong. You're more than good enough. You just don't see what I see." Jack looked up, eyes soft but stormy. "What do you see, Lila?" She smiled faintly. "Someone who makes me forget where I come from." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of rain and sagebrush. Then Lila reached into her satchel and pulled something out. A small piece of cloth with bright red stitching. "My mother's been teaching me embroidery," she said. "I made this for you." Jack unfolded it carefully. In the center, stitched in shaky letters, were the words, "Ride free." He looked at her, speechless. "You made this?" She nodded. "So even when you're far away, you'll remember. You weren't born to bow, Jack. You were born to ride." Jack swallowed hard. Something inside him ached, something he couldn't name. "I'll never leave without you," he said quietly. Lila's eyes shimmered. Don't make promises to a girl whose world isn't hers to choose. But he did. He made that promise anyway. That evening, thunder rolled far across the hills. They sat beneath their tree, watching the storm crawl across the horizon. And in the flash of lightning, Jack turned to her. "Someday I'll come for you," he said. "I don't know when, but I will." Lila's voice was barely a whisper. "Then I'll wait by the river." The rain began to fall, light and cold, dripping through the leaves and down their faces like tears. As they sat together in silence, 2 lives were being written, not by choice, but by fate. And somewhere above them, the sky listened. By the time Jack Turner turned 16, Silver Creek had changed, but not for the better. The town had grown richer, its streets busier, its rules harsher. The Monroe family's business empire spread like wildfire: land, cattle, trade. And with every acre they gained, the fences grew taller between those who had and those who had not. And Jack? He was still on the other side of those fences. He worked for Mr. Carter's ranch now, riding out before dawn and returning after sunset. His hands were calloused, his face tanned by wind and dust. Every dollar he earned went to feed his mother, whose health had begun to fade like the evening light. And yet, despite the burden, one thing never changed: his quiet visits to the river, to the old oak tree where her name was carved. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes she came too. But lately, Lila's visits had become rarer. Her father had begun to notice the way her horse's tracks always led toward the edge of town. That afternoon, Jack was in the barn, mending a broken saddle strap, when he heard footsteps crunching on the dirt. He turned, expecting the ranch foreman, and froze. Lila stood in the doorway, wearing a soft blue dress, her hair pinned neatly beneath a bonnet. She looked like she didn't belong there, like an angel lost among dust and leather. "Lila?" Jack whispered. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see you." Jack wiped his hands, heart pounding. "If someone sees, I don't care." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "Papa says I'm to be sent to Cheyenne next month, to finish school. But I know what that means. He wants to keep me away from you." Jack's jaw tightened. "He's right to think I ain't good enough. But he's wrong if he thinks I'll stop loving you." Lila stepped closer, the light catching her eyes. "You love me?" He froze, realizing the truth had escaped before he meant it to. But it was too late to take it back. "With every breath I take, Lila." For a long moment, the air between them felt heavy and alive. Then she smiled faintly. "Then we'll have to make every breath count." She leaned in, their foreheads touching, soft, trembling, infinite. But before their lips could meet, a voice thundered from outside. "Lila!" They broke apart like lightning had struck between them. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Monroe, her father, tall, broad-shouldered, his face carved with rage. Behind him, 2 ranch hands from his estate stood watching. "Get your hands off my daughter," he growled, stepping forward. Lila froze. "Papa, please, not another word," he barked. "Do you know who this boy is? A half-breed cowboy with nothing to his name. You shame your family by even standing near him." Jack clenched his fists, but said nothing. Monroe turned to him, voice low and venomous. "If I ever see you near my daughter again, boy, I'll have you run out of this town, or buried in it." Jack's chest burned, but he met the man's eyes with quiet defiance. "You can take her away from me, sir." "But you can't take her out of me." Mr. Monroe's hand twitched toward his pistol, but Lila cried out, stepping between them. "Papa, please." "He's done nothing wrong." "Enough," Monroe snapped. "You'll marry where I tell you when I tell you." "That's the end of it." He grabbed Lila's arm and dragged her toward the carriage waiting outside. She looked back, her eyes meeting Jack's, full of tears and helplessness. Jack stood frozen in the dust, unable to move, unable to breathe. As the carriage wheels rolled away, the storm inside him broke. He turned and punched the wooden wall until his knuckles bled. Outside, the wind howled through the plains, carrying her name through the silence. That night, he went to the oak tree. The carving was there, Jack plus Lila, forever. He touched it gently, his blood staining the bark. "Forever's a long time," he whispered to the wind. "But I'll wait every damn second if I have to." The rain came that night, heavy and endless, washing the dust off the rooftops and turning the streets of Silver Creek into rivers of mud. The wind rattled the saloon doors, the thunder rolled over the plains, and somewhere in the dark, a young cowboy sat beneath an old oak tree, letting the storm soak through his shirt. Jack Turner didn't move. He sat there all night, his head bowed, rain dripping from his hat brim, watching the carving on the bark blur and fade beneath the water. Jack plus Lila, forever. The word forever bled into the wood like a wound that would never heal. By morning, the storm had passed, but Jack's world hadn't changed. The Monroe mansion on the hill stood tall and proud as ever, white curtains fluttering behind tall windows. But she was gone. Lila had left Silver Creek before sunrise, her father's carriage rolling quietly down the muddy road toward Cheyenne. No one in town said a word. They just watched from their porches, pretending not to see the girl pressing her hand to the glass window, as if she could touch the life she was leaving behind. At the ranch, Jack worked like a man trying to forget how to breathe. He said little, ate less. Every time someone spoke her name, his hands would tighten around whatever he was holding. Weeks passed, then months. Sometimes, late at night, he'd sit on the fence line, looking out toward the horizon where the mountains met the stars. His horse would nudge his shoulder softly, as if reminding him he wasn't alone. But the truth was, he was. He always had been. His mother grew weaker that winter. The doctor said her lungs were failing, too many years of dust and smoke. Jack sat by her bedside, holding her fragile hand as she whispered in Lakota. "Don't lose your heart, my son," she said softly. "The wind carries what love cannot." He nodded, but the words felt far away, like a story told to someone else. When she passed in her sleep, Jack buried her beneath the same oak tree where he'd carved his first promise. He placed a single feather on her grave, a Lakota tradition, then stood there until the sun sank low, painting the sky with fire and sorrow. That evening, he found something tucked beneath a loose plank in the barn, a small piece of cloth folded neatly. It was the embroidery Lila had made for him years ago. "Ride free." He stared at the words until his vision blurred. For the first time in months, he spoke aloud. "I'm trying, Lila. I really am." 2 years later, The world outside Silver Creek changed fast. The railroads came. Men with polished boots and sharper tongues bought the land and turned the open plains into fenced property. The cowboys began to fade, ghosts of a time the world no longer wanted. But Jack stayed. He worked alone, kept to himself, spoke to no one except the wind and the river. Sometimes travelers passing through would see him by the tree, staring at the horizon. They said he looked like a man waiting for something he knew would never come. One night, under a blood-red sky, Jack made a choice. He packed his saddlebag, took one last look at the oak tree and whispered, "If she's out there, I'll find her, even if it takes my last breath." He mounted his horse, pulled his hat low, and rode west, into the setting sun, where the dust swallowed the road and the horizon burned gold. Behind him, the wind moved through the leaves of the oak tree, whispering softly, like a voice carried through time. Ride free. The wind never stopped out west. It howled through the canyons and rolled across the plains, whispering secrets of men who lived and died chasing something they could never hold. Freedom, love, redemption. For Jack Turner, it whispered her name. It had been nearly 2 years since he'd left Silver Creek. He rode across dusty towns and forgotten trails, working odd jobs for ranchers and railmen. His horse, a loyal chestnut named Whiskey, was the only friend he had left. Every town was the same. Saloons filled with tired faces, pianos that played songs about loss, and eyes that looked away when trouble entered the room. And every time Jack heard the whistle of a train or the laughter of a woman with golden hair, his heart flinched. For a second he'd think of her, Lila. Then the world would remind him that ghosts don't come back. One evening, after a long day driving cattle across the Snake River Valley, Jack found himself at a small campfire with a group of older cowhands. They traded stories over black coffee and stale biscuits. One of them, a scarred drifter named Cole, spat into the fire and said, "Love'll break a man faster than a bullet." "Don't matter how strong you think you are," Jack stared into the flames. "Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you alive." Cole laughed bitterly. "Then you ain't been hurt bad enough yet." Jack didn't answer. He just looked up at the night sky, wide, endless, and cruelly beautiful. The stars shimmered like the light in Lila's eyes the last time he saw her. The next morning, Jack rode into a small town called Pine Hollow, a forgotten place nestled between 2 ridges. The main street was quiet, just a blacksmith, a saloon, and a church that looked like it hadn't heard a prayer in years. As he hitched his horse outside the saloon, a voice called from behind. "Cowboy." "You looking for work?" Jack turned to see an older man, well-dressed but weary. Name was Mr. Carterson, owner of a dying cattle ranch. "My foreman quit last week," the man said. "I pay fair." "You got experience?" Jack nodded. "Plenty, then saddle up. I could use a man who doesn't talk much." That was how Jack ended up staying in Pine Hollow, mending fences by day, drinking quiet whiskey by night. But the past doesn't fade, even when the horizon changes. One cold evening, as snow began to fall over the empty fields, a stagecoach arrived from the east. Jack barely noticed until he heard a voice at the saloon door. It was soft, polite, and hauntingly familiar. He turned. A woman stood there, wrapped in a dark cloak, her hair hidden beneath a bonnet. Her eyes, blue-gray like rain over the plains, searched the room nervously. Jack's heart stopped. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. The woman looked at him, then smiled faintly. Not the smile he remembered, but close enough to hurt. "You from Silver Creek?" she asked softly. Jack nodded, unsure what to say. "I knew a girl from there once," she said, sitting down beside him. "Her name was Lila Monroe." Jack froze. His voice came out rough. "You knew her?" The woman nodded sadly. "We went to school together in Cheyenne. She used to talk about a boy. A cowboy. Said he had fire in his eyes and dirt on his hands." Jack's throat tightened. "Where is she now?" The woman looked down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She took sick 2 winters ago. Fever. She didn't make it." The saloon went silent. The piano stopped playing. Jack sat there, staring into nothing, every sound fading except the slow, shattering beat of his heart. She talked about you, you know, the woman added gently. Said if he ever comes back to that river, tell him I waited. Jack closed his eyes. The room spun around him. Outside, the snow fell like ash. Later that night, he saddled whiskey and rode out into the white silence. He didn't know where he was going, only that the wind carried her voice soft and broken. I waited, and for the first time since leaving Silver Creek, Jack Turner cried, not like a cowboy, not like a man, but like a soul that had lost its reason to keep riding. The plains were endless, nothing but cold wind, dead grass, and the slow creak of saddle leather as Jack Turner rode beneath a sky that looked like it had forgotten how to shine. 3 weeks had passed since he learned the truth, that Lila Monroe, the only person who ever made him believe in forever, was gone. Fever, they said. Buried somewhere in Cheyenne. He didn't go to her grave. He couldn't. Something inside him refused to believe it. She can't be gone, he whispered to the wind. She promised she'd wait. The wind didn't answer. But sometimes, when it rushed through the canyons, it sounded almost like her laughter. Jack wandered north with no plan, just his horse, his saddlebag, and a bottle that emptied too fast. He stopped talking to people. He stopped sleeping. The fire in his eyes had turned to smoke. One night, he camped near the edge of the Badlands, a place so quiet that even the coyotes didn't dare to sing. He built a small fire, poured what little whiskey he had left, and stared into the flames until the world blurred. That's when he heard it, a voice, soft, familiar. Jack. He froze. His hand went to his pistol, but he didn't draw. He turned slowly, and there she was, Lila, standing in the moonlight, her hair loose, her eyes shining like the stars he'd stopped believing in. She looked exactly as she had the last day he saw her, young, wild, full of something bigger than life. Jack's heart stopped. Lila? His voice cracked like dry wood. She smiled sadly. You kept your promise. He stumbled forward, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. I thought you were gone? I am, she whispered. But love doesn't die just because we do. Jack's breath hitched. Why me, Lila? Why can't you let me go? She stepped closer. Because you never did. Her hand brushed his cheek, soft, warm, real. For a moment the world was whole again. The pain vanished. The air smelled like the river and the oak tree. Then she said, It's not your time yet. You still have miles to ride. Jack shook his head. I don't want miles. I want you. A tear slid down her face. Or maybe it was moonlight. You'll see me again. Just not here. And just like that, she was gone. The wind blew out the fire, leaving him in the dark. When morning came, Jack woke in the ashes, cold and shaking. He told himself it was a dream, but when he looked at the ground beside him, there was something there, a single white feather, lying where she had stood. He picked it up and smiled weakly. Guess you found a way to ride free after all. That day, Jack changed. He started working again. Small towns, lost places. He helped ranchers rebuild after storms, buried the dead when no one else would, and played guitar for children by the fire. They called him the Quiet Rider, a man with eyes like a ghost and a kindness that didn't belong in the wild. Everywhere he went, he carried the white feather tied to his hatband, and sometimes, when the wind picked up just right, he could almost hear her voice behind him. Keep riding, Jack, keep riding. That night, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Jack sat alone on a hill. He watched the sky burn orange and gold, his shadow stretching long beside his horse. Maybe we never lose the people we love, he murmured. Maybe they just ride ahead of us, waiting at the next horizon. The wind moved softly through the grass, and for a second, he swore he heard her laugh again. He smiled. Then he tipped his hat to the fading sky and rode west, chasing the sun one more time. The world hadn't changed much, only Jack had. A year had passed since that night under the Badlands sky, the night he swore he saw her. Lila, the ghost of his heart. Most men would have called it a dream brought on by whiskey and grief. But Jack knew better. He'd seen her eyes. He'd felt her hand. And that was enough to keep him breathing. By spring, the cowboy everyone called the Quiet Rider had become a legend of the border towns. He wasn't known for his gun, though. He could draw faster than most, but for the way he helped people without asking for a damn thing in return. He'd fix broken fences, mend sick cattle, teach kids how to ride. When outlaws came through, he didn't reach for his gun first. He reached for reason. Most times that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. People said he was running from something. They weren't wrong. At night, when the fire burned low, Jack would look at the stars and whisper, "You still out there, Lila? You said I still had miles to ride. I'm riding, darling. But tell me where." The wind always answered. Soft, empty, endless. One dusty afternoon, Jack rode into a mining town called Red Bluff, a rough little place carved into the side of a canyon. He was just looking for supplies and maybe a warm meal, but fate had other plans. As he stepped into the saloon, a fight was already breaking out. Two men were cornering a kid, no older than 17, accusing him of cheating at cards. Jack didn't think. He just moved. A second later, one man was on the floor with a bleeding lip, the other staring down the barrel of Jack's Colt. "Let the boy go," Jack said quietly. They didn't argue. Something in his voice made them freeze. When it was over, Jack holstered his gun and turned to the kid. "You all right, son?" The boy nodded, trembling. "They said I stole their gold dust." "I didn't. I swear." "I believe you." Jack dropped a coin on the table. "Eat something, then get out of this town before it eats you." The boy looked at him with wide, grateful eyes. "What's your name, mister?" Jack hesitated. Just Jack. That night, Jack sat outside the saloon, smoking a cigarette under the dim glow of the moon. The boy came back out holding something in his hand, a small folded paper. "Someone told me to give this to you," he said. Jack frowned. "To me?" "Yeah. Said a man dressed like a preacher left it for a cowboy with a white feather on his hat. That's you, ain't it?" Jack's pulse slowed. "Yeah, that's me." He took the paper. The boy nodded and left. Jack unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat, delicate, but not familiar, yet the words froze him cold. "If you still ride with the wind, come to Silver Creek. Not all ghosts are dead. No name, no mark. Just that message. For a long time." Jack just sat there, staring at the note, his cigarette burning down to ash between his fingers. Could it be a lie? A trap? Or could it be her? He looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, his heart beat like it had something left to lose. He folded the note carefully, tucked it into his coat, and stood. Guess the trail ain't over after all. Whiskey neighed softly, sensing his master's change. Jack smiled faintly and mounted up. As he rode out of Red Bluff, the night wind rose around him, sharp and wild, carrying the faintest whisper he hadn't heard since that stormy night beneath the oak tree. "Ride free, Jack." And so he did. Westward, toward Silver Creek, toward the truth waiting in the dust. The letter stayed folded in Jack's coat pocket for 3 days before he dared to open it again. Every time he touched the paper, it felt alive, like it had a pulse of its own. "If you still ride with the wind, come to Silver Creek. Not all ghosts are dead." Those words wouldn't leave his mind. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He just rode in west through open land and old silence, chasing a message that could either break him again or set his soul free. By the second week, Jack crossed into familiar country, the long dry plains that led toward the hills where he'd once run wild as a boy. Everything looked smaller now. The river was thinner, the trees older, the sky somehow sadder. But when he saw the outline of Silver Creek shimmering in the distance, something inside him stopped. The town hadn't changed much. Same crooked church steeple, same dusty streets, same quiet ache hanging in the air, but Jack wasn't the same man who'd left. He rode in slow, hat-brim low, dust trailing behind him like memory. A few old folks turned their heads. They saw the feather on his hat and whispered, "That can't be him." Not Jack Turner, he ignored them. He wasn't here for ghosts of gossip. He was here for her. At the saloon he ordered coffee instead of whiskey, his hands too steady for liquor now. As he sat there, a man approached, older, grayer, wearing a preacher's collar that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. "You're Jack Turner," the man said quietly. Jack looked up. "Used to be." The preacher sat down across from him. "Then this letter found the right soul." Jack's pulse thudded. "You the one who sent it?" The man nodded. "Name's Reverend Hale. I served at the mission outside Cheyenne. I knew Miss Lila Monroe." Jack froze. The sound of her name hit harder than any bullet. "Knew?" he echoed, voice shaking. The preacher sighed. "She was sick, yes. But she didn't die in Cheyenne. Not the way they told you." Jack leaned forward. "Then tell me what happened." Hale hesitated, eyes heavy. "Her father arranged for her to marry a businessman from Denver. She refused. She ran away the night before the wedding. He told the town she died of fever to save face, but in truth he sent men after her." Jack's blood turned cold. "Did they find her?" The preacher looked away. "She was wounded, badly. They brought her to the mission. We nursed her as best we could. She stayed for months." Jack gripped the edge of the table. "Is she alive?" Hale met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, Jack saw pity. "She left before winter. Said she couldn't stay. Said if anyone came looking, she'd be waiting by the river where the oak tree grows." Jack couldn't breathe. The saloon noise faded until all he heard was the sound of the river in his head, the one that had carried their laughter, their promises, their childhood. Waiting by the river, he stood, leaving coins on the table. "Thank you, Reverend." "Son," Hale said softly, "she may still carry her scars. The girl you loved might not be the woman you find." Jack nodded. "Neither am I the boy she left." That night, he rode out of Silver Creek, not toward the hills, not toward the horizon, but toward the river. The wind whipped through his hair, cold and wild, carrying whispers of her voice, her laughter, her name. Every hoofbeat sounded like her heartbeat, and as the moon climbed high, Jack saw it, the silhouette of the old oak tree standing proud by the water. Just as it had all those years ago, he stopped his horse, staring in silence. For the first time in years, he dared to hope. The moon rode high that night, pale as bone over the valley. Jack rode through the whispering grass, his horse's hooves sinking soft into the earth that remembered too much. Ahead, the oak tree rose like a ghost, strong, familiar, eternal. Every leaf seemed to shimmer with memory. Every sound in the dark carried her laughter, the voice that once made his world whole. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the damp soil by the water's edge. The river murmured, the same soft current that had carried their childhood dreams downstream. Now it carried silence. Jack knelt by the roots of the oak, tracing the carved initials that still marked the bark, J+L, faint but unbroken. His hand trembled as he whispered, "You really waited here, didn't you, darling?" The night wind moved gently through the branches, like fingers brushing through his hair. He felt it again, that ache in his chest that wasn't quite grief, not quite hope. Then he saw it. Across the river, a small light flickered. Not a lantern, not a campfire, but something softer. A single candle, glowing through the window of a cabin half hidden by trees. Jack froze. He hadn't noticed it before. Maybe it hadn't been there. Or maybe he'd never had reason to look. He mounted up, heart pounding like thunder. The current was shallow, but the crossing felt endless. When he reached the other side, the air smelled of smoke and wildflowers. The door of the cabin stood slightly open, and the candle still burned. He stepped inside quietly. The place was small. One bed, one chair, one table, but clean. And on that table lay something that made his breath catch in his throat. A locket, old and silver, with a crack down the middle. He opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a faded sketch, him and her drawn by Lila's hand years ago. "You kept this?" A soft voice came from behind him. He turned, and there she was, older, thinner, her hair streaked with silver, but those eyes. Those same eyes that once saw the world in colors he couldn't name. She looked at him like a ghost afraid to believe. "Jack," she whispered. He couldn't speak. His throat burned. His knees almost gave out. "You're alive," he breathed. "They told me." "I know," she said softly. "They told me you left. That you'd forgotten." He took a slow step toward her. "Never." Tears filled her eyes, and for a heartbeat the years between them disappeared. They were just two kids again, standing under that tree, promising forever. Jack reached out, his hand trembling, and she took it. The same warmth, the same spark. The candle flickered, and for the first time in forever the cowboy felt home. For a long time neither of them spoke. The only sound was the river outside, soft, steady, endless. It was the same sound that had once carried their laughter when they were children. But tonight, it carried every year they'd lost. Jack looked at her like he was afraid she'd fade away if he blinked. Lila stood near the flickering candlelight, her shadow trembling against the cabin wall. She looked older, yes, but not broken, like the land itself had shaped her, scarred her, and still kept her standing. "I thought you were gone," Jack said, voice raw. "I buried you in my heart, Lila," she smiled sadly. "And I buried you in my prayers." He stepped closer. "Tell me what happened. Tell me everything." Lila sat down slowly, her hands clasped together, one trembling, one scarred. "The night before my wedding," she began, "I ran. I couldn't marry him, Jack. I couldn't be bought like a piece of land. I rode until my horse gave out. Your father's old trail horse, remember him?" Jack nodded silently. "They found me by dawn. My father's men. They didn't mean to kill me. I think they just wanted to scare me into coming home. But one of them," she looked down, voice cracking. "He fired. The bullet went through my shoulder. I fell into the river." Jack's breath hitched. "The river?" "Yes," her eyes glistened. "It carried me all the way down to the mission at Cheyenne. They thought I was dead when I arrived. For weeks I drifted between life and death. The Reverend, the one you met, he saved me." Jack stared at her, the candlelight catching the tears in his eyes. "All this time, I thought I'd lost you." "You did," she said softly. "We lost each other. But maybe the river didn't." The silence between them thickened. The candle flickered low, and the night wind whispered through the cracks of the cabin walls. Jack looked down at her hands. One bore a faint ring scar, where the engagement band had once cut her skin. "You never went back," he said. "How could I?" She whispered. "My father disowned me. The town believed I was dead. I stayed in the mission helping the sick. I thought about you every day, but I didn't know if you were still alive." Jack's jaw tightened. "I rode the country blind for years, Lila. I looked for you in every face I passed. I swore if I ever found you I'd never let you go again," she smiled faintly. "Then don't." He reached across the table, and for the first time in 10 long years, their hands found each other again, warm, trembling, human, but the joy in his chest was tangled with sorrow. Because as he looked closer, he saw something else in her eyes, something fragile. "Lila," he said quietly. "What is it you're not telling me?" Her gaze dropped. "The bullet. It never fully came out. The fever comes and goes." "I don't have long, Jack." The words fell like thunder. He shook his head. "Don't say that. We just found each other," she smiled through her tears. "Then let's not waste what little time we have." That night, they sat by the fire, hand in hand, telling stories of the life they never lived. They laughed through tears, remembering old summers, secret trails, and promises made under starlight. When she grew tired, she leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Do you hear it, Jack?" "The river," she nodded weakly. "It remembers us." It always did. He kissed her forehead, his tears falling into her hair. Outside, the moonlight rippled across the water, silver, soft, eternal. The river remembered, and soon it would carry one more story downstream. The dawn came pale and cold over the hills, painting the cabin in shades of ash and gold. Lila slept against Jack's chest, her breath soft, her pulse faint but steady. He held her like the world might steal her away again if he blinked. For a few hours, there was peace, the kind that only comes when two souls finally stop running. But the world outside had long memories, and fate had a cruel sense of timing. Jack was chopping wood behind the cabin when he saw them. 5 riders on black horses cresting the ridge. Their dust plumes cut through the morning sun like ghosts, and at their head rode a man Jack hadn't seen in over a decade, Charles Monroe, Lila's father. Age hadn't softened him. His suit was pressed, his silver beard sharp, his eyes colder than iron. He dismounted with practiced grace, like a man used to commanding obedience. Jack's hands clenched around the axe handle. "You got no business here, Mr. Monroe," the older man smiled thinly. "On the contrary, boy, you've taken something that belongs to me." "She was never yours to take," Jack said quietly. Monroe's expression darkened. "You think you can hide my daughter in this shack and call it love? You think a life of dirt and dust is what she deserves?" Jack stepped closer, his voice low, calm, dangerous. "She deserves peace. Something you never gave her." The men behind Monroe shifted, 6 guns between them, restless, hungry for blood. Jack's eyes flicked toward the door. Inside, Lila had stirred. She was watching through the window, pale but fierce. "Papa," she called weakly. "Go home." He turned toward her voice, something flickering in his eyes. Regret, maybe. But it died quick. "Come now, Lila, don't shame me again. Come with me and this man walks free." Lila shook her head. "You lied once. You told the world I was dead. You killed me long before he found me." The silence after that was sharp as broken glass. Jack stepped forward. "You heard her." Monroe's hand went to his pistol. "You forget who I am, boy." Jack's eyes didn't move. "No, sir, but I think you forget who I've become." The air exploded. The crack of a gunshot shattered the dawn. Jack's hat flew from his head as a bullet grazed the brim. He dropped behind the water trough, returning fire. One shot, clean and true, taking down the man on Monroe's left. The rest scattered, firing wildly. The cabin window shattered. Lila screamed. Jack moved like lightning, out the side door, flanking them through the trees. The old instincts kicked in, years of pain and survival sharpened into one purpose: protect her. He dropped 2 more riders before the dust settled. When the smoke cleared, only Monroe remained, his gun empty, his pride bleeding out with the sunrise. "Go on," he rasped. "Finish it," Jack holstered his pistol. "I don't kill for hate," Monroe staggered forward, trembling. "Then what do you kill for, boy?" Jack met his eyes. "For love. For peace. And I reckon you don't know either one." The old man stared at him, the fight draining out. His gaze shifted toward the cabin, toward Lila standing weakly in the doorway. For the first time, his voice cracked. "Lila! I only ever wanted, but she turned away. You wanted control. I wanted life." He dropped his gun, mounted his horse, and rode off into the rising light, a shadow swallowed by dust. Jack ran back to the cabin, heart pounding, finding Lila trembling by the doorway. He caught her before she fell, her body fragile as paper, her breath ragged. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." She smiled faintly, eyes heavy. "No, Jack. It's never over. Not in this world." He held her close as the wind howled through the valley. The same wind that once carried their laughter, now carrying gun smoke and sorrow. The guns of fate had spoken, and they never missed. The world felt quiet after the guns. Too quiet. Smoke still curled through the morning air, the smell of gunpowder clinging to the wildflowers near the cabin. Jack held Lila in his arms, her breath shallow, her skin pale as frost. He could feel it. She was slipping away again. "Stay with me, darling," he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "We made it through hell. We can make it through this." She smiled faintly, a tear catching the light on her cheek. "I told you, Jack." "I don't have long." He shook his head, his voice trembling. "No, you hear me? We're gonna ride south. There's a doctor in Carson Wells. You'll be all right." But she just looked at him, eyes full of that same quiet knowing that always scared him. The look of someone who'd already made peace with the end. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. Don't let the hate win." "My father," the world, the pain. It'll eat you alive if you let it. You've carried enough ghosts, Jack swallowed hard. You're my ghost, Lila. You always will be. She reached up, fingers tracing his jaw. Then promise me you'll let me go when it's time. He wanted to say no. He wanted to fight fate again like he always had. But he could see it in her. The fever had returned, burning behind her eyes, stealing her strength. He nodded slowly, tears falling unchecked. I promise. The sun crept higher, casting gold across the river. Lila leaned against him, her voice barely a whisper. Do you remember the night we carved our names in that tree? Jack smiled weakly. I remember every damn splinter. You said we'd grow old together by this river. I meant it, he said. You did. She smiled, then coughed softly, her hand tightening around his. But maybe growing old isn't about years. Maybe it's about moments, the kind that live forever. Her words broke something inside him. Don't talk like that. She closed her eyes. Then just hold me, Jack. Hold me till it's morning. He held her long after the sun climbed high, the river singing softly beside them, the same melody it had played since they were children. When the wind finally fell silent, he felt it, her last breath, light as the dust between his fingers. He didn't cry at first. He just sat there, the world gone still, his promise echoing inside his chest like a broken prayer. When he finally looked up, the river was glowing, silver, endless, eternal. You always did love the sound of the water, he whispered. I reckon it loves you back. He kissed her forehead one last time and laid her beneath the oak, the same place where their story had begun. Then he mounted his horse and rode into the horizon, the locket around his neck heavy with everything he'd lost and everything he still had to remember. The last promise was made, and it would haunt him forever. A year passed since the morning he buried her beneath the oak. The grave was simple, just her name carved into a flat river stone and the silver locket he'd worn for years resting on top. He didn't stay to watch it weather. Some love stories are too heavy to guard. They live best in memory. Jack Turner became a wanderer again, but not the same kind. The whiskey was gone, replaced by coffee and quiet prayers. The gun stayed holstered, except when the innocent needed protecting. Folks called him the rider of ghosts, a man who drifted through broken towns, helped where he could, then vanished like smoke. Everywhere he went, the wind carried whispers of her name. In the spring of '86, he reached a settlement near the mountains, a mining town half-eaten by greed and grief. There he found a boy, maybe 12, being beaten by 2 ranchers for stealing bread. Jack stepped in, calm and cold, and sent the men running. He took the boy to the riverbank outside town, gave him food, and asked, You got a name, son? Eli, the boy said softly. My ma died last winter. Pa too, I just didn't want to starve, Jack nodded slowly. Ain't no sin in wanting to live, the boy looked up. You gonna turn me in? Jack smiled faintly. Nah, I reckon I could use some company. They traveled together after that. Jack taught him how to ride, how to mend a saddle, how to listen to the wind before the rain came. Sometimes at night, he'd tell stories, not about gunfights or gold, but about a girl with eyes like the river and a heart that refused to quit. Eli would listen quietly, then ask, What happened to her? Jack always smiled the same sad smile. She went where the wind sleeps. The boy never pressed further. Maybe he understood. Maybe some things don't need explaining. Months passed. Together, they fixed fences, helped farmers, even stopped a gang from burning a church for land rights. Jack didn't realize it at first. But with every mile, every act of kindness, he was rebuilding something inside himself, something Lila had planted long ago. One night, as they camped by the water, Eli looked at him and said, You talk about her like she's still here. Jack gazed at the fire, the flames reflected in his tired eyes. Maybe she is. Maybe when you love someone that deep, they don't die. They just change places. The boy frowned. What do you mean? He smiled faintly. I mean, sometimes the wind carries their laugh. Sometimes the stars shine a little different, And sometimes you feel something warm inside you when you're doing right. That's them, reminding you to keep riding. The boy nodded slowly, eyes glistening. She must have loved you a lot. Jack stared into the fire. Enough to make me a better man. When they broke camp the next morning, the air was still, the sky soft blue. The wind rose only once, just enough to rustle the leaves and whisper through the grass. Jack tipped his hat toward the horizon and murmured, "Sleep easy, darling. I'm still riding." And as he and the boy rode off toward the sunrise, the sound of the river followed, gentle, steady, eternal. Where the wind sleeps, love never does. The years had worn Jack Turner into a legend. Some said he'd once faced down 10 men in a ghost town. Some said he rode with the wind itself. But truth be told, he was just tired. Tired and quiet, with silver in his beard and a heart still half full of river songs. Eli was grown now, 23, a man with his own horse and a steadier hand than Jack ever had. They'd parted ways near the Colorado border, Eli promising to write, Jack promising to keep riding. But when the wind turned cold that autumn, the promise he'd kept buried for 10 long years came calling. He dreamt of her again. Lila. Not sick, not dying, but standing beneath the oak tree, smiling like she did when the world was still kind. When he woke, the dream felt less like memory and more like a summons. So he saddled up whiskey. An old stubborn horse now, bones creaking as much as his own, and rode east, back toward Silver Creek, back toward the ghost of his youth. The town was smaller now, quieter, half forgotten by the railroad boom that had passed it by. Children played in the dusty streets where gunmen once stood. Life had gone on, as it always does. But Jack wasn't here for life. He was here for what came after. He followed the river north, where the hills folded into soft green valleys. By sunset, he reached the old oak. It still stood, older, wider, weathered by time but unbroken. Just like her. The grave beneath it was covered in wildflowers, the stone half buried but still legible. Lila Monroe Turner. Where the river runs, love remembers. He knelt slowly, his knees aching, his breath catching in his chest. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years. "Hey, darling," he whispered. "You see what I made of your promise? Been helping folks. Taught a boy to live honest. Ain't shot a man in anger since the day you left." The wind stirred gently, brushing through the grass like a hand through his hair. He smiled faintly. "I figured you'd like that." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle. A faded ribbon, the one she used to tie her hair with when they were kids. He laid it on the grave, next to a smooth river stone he'd carried since the day she died. "You told me to let go," he murmured. "Took me half a lifetime to learn how. But I reckon I'm ready now." The river murmured softly, catching the golden light of dusk. For a moment he thought he heard her voice. Light as the breeze, warm as the sun. "You kept your promise, Jack." He closed his eyes, tears tracing down weathered cheeks. The pain was still there, but it didn't hurt the same. It was a quieter ache, the kind that comes with peace. As night fell, he made a small camp beside the river. He didn't build a fire, just lay beneath the stars, listening to the current whisper through the reeds. When sleep finally came, it came gentle. He dreamt of her again, not as a ghost this time, but as the girl by the river, barefoot and laughing, holding out her hand. "Come on, Jack," she said. "The wind's waiting." He smiled in his sleep, whispering, "I'm coming, darling. Just needed one more sunrise." The dawn came soft and gold like a whisper. The river shimmered beside the old oak, carrying the sky's first light, as if it were a secret only the wind could understand. Jack Turner lay beneath that tree, hat over his eyes, hands folded across his chest. To anyone passing by, he might have looked asleep. Maybe he was. The years had carved deep lines into his face, but they couldn't erase the peace that had finally settled there. The storm inside him, the one that had raged since the day he lost her, was gone. He had come home. When the sun crept higher, a breeze drifted through the grass, soft, almost playful. And somewhere in that whisper there came laughter. Light, familiar, young, he opened his eyes. The world around him shimmered. The oak stood taller, greener. The river ran bright as polished glass. And there, standing by the water's edge, was Lila, barefoot, smiling. Just as she'd been the day they first met. Jack pushed himself to his feet, slow but steady. He stared at her, disbelief breaking into something like a laugh. "You waited," she smiled. "You took your time." He took a step closer, and suddenly he was young again, strong, sure, the years falling away like dust in the wind. The ache in his bones vanished. The weight on his chest lifted. "Didn't reckon heaven would look like Silver Creek," he said. She laughed softly, eyes shining. "Maybe heaven's just the place where love remembers." He looked around. The golden river, the soft wind, the endless sky. Everything felt alive, pulsing with the rhythm of everything they'd ever lost and found. "You know," he said, "I never did finish our dance." Lila reached for his hand. "Then don't stop now." He pulled her close, and they swayed, there beneath the oak, with the wind as their music and the world holding its breath. For a moment, time forgot itself. When they finally stopped, she rested her head against his chest. "You kept your promise, Jack. You rode free." He smiled, eyes glistening. "Couldn't do nothing else." "Not after you." Far below, the river shimmered, real again, the sun now high in the waking world. Eli rode into Silver Creek that morning, looking for the man who'd once saved him. He found the camp by the oak, still warm, with 2 sets of footprints in the dirt. One large, one small, leading toward the river and fading at the water's edge. Beside Jack's bedroll lay a note, written in shaky but steady hand. "When the wind calls, don't be afraid to follow. I'll be waiting where the river meets the stars." Eli stood there a long time, hat pressed to his chest. The wind stirred once, lifting the note gently, carrying it downstream, and though he couldn't see them, he felt them. 2 riders moving across the horizon side by side, laughing softly as the light swallowed them whole. The people of Silver Creek still talk about the cowboy who came home to die beneath the oak. They say when the wind blows right, you can hear the faint sound of hooves and a woman's laughter riding the breeze. Some say it's just a story. But those who listen close, really close, know better. Love doesn't die. It rides on. Their story becomes a legend, whispered by cowboys, sung by drifters, remembered by rivers. And every time the wind blows through Silver Creek, people say you can still hear them laughing, Jack and Lila, the cowboy and the girl who taught him how to ride free.